The following is a presentation of the Pro Wrestling Report. Informative, entertaining, and real since 1998.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the all-new Pro Wrestling Report Primetime Wednesday night. Yes, indeed, you now get two episodes of Primetime each and every week from the Pro Wrestling Report. And this week on Primetime Wednesday, we're going to go in depth and look at the star power situation in professional wrestling. All that along with the new segment, the Top 5, Ask the Booker, and a profile on Brock Lesnar. Pro Wrestling Report Primetime Wednesday starts right here, right now.
This is the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime TV, the longest-running pro wrestling news program in the world, with your hosts, David Hero and Damian Nelson.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime Wednesday night. Damian Nelson sitting alongside David Octavius and Tiberius, the alleged backyard one-time Hall of Fame hero. And a brand new weekly edition of Primetime, David. We've listened to you, and now you get 2 episodes of Primetime each and every week on Wednesdays and Saturdays.
Hump Day with the Super Friends and Nelson family.
Speaking of which, winning. Thank you to Heath Slater for getting me those 5 points I needed to exceed the points of David Hero. You know, I said from day one in the Pro Wrestling Report draft that I wasn't worried, that I knew that my strategy would equal a win come WrestleMania, and it did. I don't care if it's only by 5 points, because a win is a win, and a win I did.
I'm so glad your number 2 pick in the draft, Heath Slater, got you some fancy.
So all you doubters out there, oh, who picks Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel? This guy. Who wins because of Heath Slater? This guy. You shall doubt me nevermore. But anyways, let's get right into this week's in-depth segment here on Primetime Wednesday. And David Hero, it's a question that's been asked by us, by a lot of fans over the last several months, maybe even years. Who is to blame for the lack of stars in WWE? Who is to blame for the lack of star power in WWE? Arguably, over the last few years, there have been not many stars made in World Wrestling Entertainment, especially when you compare today's stars to the stars of old, including Hulk Hogan, not John Cena, Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior even, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin. There is nobody who has reached the level that they have, including John Cena, in professional wrestling. While it's clear that the landscape of professional wrestling has changed substantially over the last several years, there still is not that one star. You do have your major stars in WWE, including John Cena, Randy Orton, The Big Show, I would say, even CM Punk. But still, none of them have achieved the level of stardom that has been historically achieved by some of the names mentioned before in wrestling. So the question, David Hero, is, who is to blame, if anyone? And the first category that we'll look at as to whether or not they are to blame is it WWE's fault? And I would say somewhat it is.
It all begins and ends with the WWE. Right now, what they have in Florida Championship Wrestling is nothing more than an over-budgeted WCW power plant. If you think about it, compare FCW to the power plant. Who did they bring out of the power plant?
Goldberg.
Yes, that's been it. So you can say the same thing about FCW with Sheamus. And that's about it. Not a whole lot of guys have come out of FCW. They need to get their developmental facility, their trainers, their teachers, everything they have down there revamped. They need to start over fresh, scrap the system. It's obviously not working. Get these guys touring a little bit more. Make Florida Championship Wrestling into a territory. Go up into Alabama and Georgia and Louisiana. Tour across, the southeast region. Let these guys get ring time in. Don't let them work the same guys all the time, the guys that they practice with all the time. What made wrestling successful were the territories back in the day. That's where The Rock cut his teeth, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mick Foley, Triple H, Shawn Michaels. The stars that headlined WrestleMania were the guys that spent time in different territories perfecting their skills and their crafts. Unfortunately, in FCW, that does not happen down there.
Perhaps, though, that is the next era for FCW, as we did learn recently that there are changes down the horizon for Florida Championship Wrestling. It could be a geographical move. It could be some of those things you just mentioned. But it is difficult to argue that the WWE has not tried to make new stars. Look at some examples. The Miz, Sheamus, Alberto Del Rio, CM Punk, to name a few.
Well,
they ultimately...
Hold on. Punk, first of all, worked the Indies. He worked
Correct.
all over the world. He's worked Ring of Honor. He's been in TNA. ADR was a star in Mexico already.
Which is relatively irrelevant to WWE.
You kind of have to take Punk and ADR out of that mix because they don't count. Even Daniel Bryan Danielson is a guy that has worked the territories, the Indies, Ring of Honor.
But that doesn't mean
overseas.
WWE did not try with them.
No, of course not. But those guys were already ahead of the game. They knew how to get themselves over. Daniel Bryan was saddled with a bunch of crap, let's face it, for the first 6 months. And he was able to figure it out, get himself over. Same with CM Punk. Same with ADR.
They ultimately have tried, but they ultimately have to deliver results, which they have not done. We said that if there were no Rock and Cena on last Sunday's WrestleMania, there would not have been the excitement surrounding WrestleMania. They would not have achieved the business successes that they did. That's no knock on CM Punk. But they don't have that same star power that has been historically seen in wrestling. The next question, if you're not going to blame WWE, or if you are going to blame WWE, what about the talent themselves? We hear time and time again about the difference between today's talent and yesterday's talent. You pointed on why some of those differences are obvious. Obviously, there are no territories anymore. There is no proving ground. There is no training ground. Yes, you've got Ring of Honor. Yes, you've got FCW. Yes, you've got the TNA organization as well. But at the end of the day, as you've said many a time, David Hero, a lot of these organizations where people get their feet wet for WWE are nothing but promo camps. And it doesn't focus on how to be a star and how to have it ingrained in your head how to work that crowd. It doesn't have it ingrained in your head. You don't learn, you don't get the skill, the art, the talent to be over, if you will, as has been done in the past.
And the problem with that is they don't know how to be over because they're not allowed to get themselves over. They're handed a script by a writing team. Their matches are all planned out by an agent. There is no producer or agent, whatever you want to call them. The problem is when they go out in front of a crowd, and let's say they're expecting 1,000 people, now there's 250 or there's 100. Now they have to work at different pace on the independents and FCW. They don't. If they miss a spot, well, how do they get from point A to point D without B and C? That's the kind of stuff they have to learn. So yeah, some of it does fall on the talent, but at the end of the day, the majority of the talent, they're handcuffed. They're gagged. They're not given the creative freedom that the other guys before them were given.
But there are politics. We did a special a couple of years back on the politics of professional wrestling. You will only get as far as the machine, if you will let you get.
Well, but that's not necessarily true. To a certain extent, look at Zack Ryder. But then, of course, the machine did stop him dead in his tracks. But he did get himself over, and they had no choice but to look at him and see, okay, hey, there's something here with this guy. They gave him a little bit, then they yanked the carpet off from underneath him.
Zack Ryder is a prime example. Had he not stepped up, had he not gone and got it, if you will, he would never have been in the spot he is in WWE. But at the same time, another group we want to ask if is to blame for the lack of star power are the fans themselves, because it was the fans that got Zack Ryder noticed. It was the fans that got Zack Ryder, got the momentum behind Zack Ryder. But at the end of the day, those same fans, once he got what they wanted, didn't care about him anymore.
But that's because Zack Ryder and the creative process didn't give the fans anything else. They didn't give them something that they could latch on to. They'll cheer the guy, they'll boo the guy, they'll get the reaction, but once the fans stop believing in that, Zack Ryder, best case scenario, woo woo woo, you know it. Oh, he's funny, he's great, he's creative, he's getting over. All of a sudden, boom, he has become Eve's female dog. Right? Kick to the cashews at WrestleMania.
But he's on TV.
But You know what? The referees are on TV also.
Well, the referees didn't have a fan union or a fan movement behind them to get them on TV.
What I'm saying is Zack Ryder, as much of a rocket they put on Zack Ryder straight to the top, he has now fallen. How does Zack Ryder recover? You know what I mean?
Well, arguably, is it realistic to believe that Zack Ryder will ever be in a position higher than he has been or will be or is right now in the company? Meaning, is he a future champion, world or heavy or WWE?
Right now with that character, there's no way. There's too many guys way ahead of him for that to happen. But I feel bad for Zack Ryder. The guy was probably feeling good about himself, promised the moon, and then all of a sudden Kane beats him up, Eve cheats on him, Eve costs him the match at WrestleMania. Now he's doing jobs to other WWE talent.
The era of instant gratification has hurt wrestling, meaning the era of the fans who are too impatient and too quote-unquote smart makes them less fans and more critics. And what I mean by that is, you look at Daniel Bryan as well, the yes, yes, yes chants. And how many people were so fast to jump on the fact that he got quote-unquote squashed at WrestleMania, and how dare WWE do that, and it's crapping on Daniel Bryan, and blah, 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 when in fact that was the best thing that could have ever happened to him. And how quickly a lot of fans forget that WWE did the same thing almost with Christian. When he won the World Heavyweight Championship, there was a fan movement for that, then lost it a week later, and then had one of the best runs he's ever had in WWE after that.
Agreed. And Bryan Danielson is definitely on his way. He'll be a bigger and better star by losing to Sheamus at WrestleMania than if he would have beaten him.
Yes, 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 yes. Will that replace what? I hope so.
Well, it will never be as iconic as what, but it'll be pretty good.
The final category, as we look at who might be to blame for the perceived lack of current stars in WWE, is it the veteran talent? Is it the returning Rock? Is it the returning Chris Jericho? Is it the returning Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, and even as of this past Monday night, Brock Lesnar? Is it those talents? Is it those veteran talents that are holding back all the young guys that a lot of fans believe out there, that are holding back all the young guys and causing them to not be able to ascend to stardom as they would if those guys were not there? At least that's perception.
It only depends if they're held back, if the guys like Triple H and The Rock and Brock Lesnar don't help elevate these younger guys.
Have they?
They haven't been put in the same program. But if these guys were elevated, there would be no need for a Brock, a Rock, a Triple H, Undertaker. Like JBL said,
at the Hall of Fame?
At the Hall of Fame induction speech.
You know he's a
Ron
wrestling
Simmons.
god.
He was talking about the children sitting in front of him. I believe that's what he called them, right? The children. When the acolytes, the APA, were on TV, they were doing an 8-point rating, he said. And when him and Ron Simmons did a match, it drew an 8.6. Biggest quarter hour of all time in the Attitude Era. What does that tell you about how the guys got themselves over back then? Sure, it was a different time. But sure, it was more creative freedom. It was Attitude. It wasn't PG. But wrestling has potential to be that big again once guys can establish themselves as being believable, being credible, being somebody you want to boo, somebody you want to cheer for, someone that can draw money. And right now, they invested so much time and so much money into John Cena and nobody else. Yes, they did stuff with Randy Orton and CM Punk, but John Cena being the golden goose, John Cena's brought nobody else up with him.
They are proven. These veteran talents are proven. They draw money, they draw buys, they draw merchandise sales, they draw ratings. WWE has a responsibility to not only its shareholders, but to everyone else to deliver financial results. In this trial period over the last few years where they've tried to build some stars, they've not delivered those results. Not as much so as they did in the past. As a matter of fact, even if you take out the movie division, they're still down in their business drivers. These talents being on these cards draws enough attention to the product where it does actually help these other stars who are being quote-unquote buried by their returns. Look at WrestleMania 14 with Tyson going into the Hall of Fame this past weekend. If Mike Tyson was not a part of WrestleMania 14, the tide would not have changed for WWE in wrestling. So everybody benefited from that. You look at WrestleMania this past Sunday, you look at Raw this past Monday night, you look at the SmackDown you're going to see on Friday. I believe that tide has changed again in professional wrestling, and I believe there is but one man to blame for that, and that is The Rock. Because if The Rock had not been a part of WrestleMania and the lead up to WrestleMania, the attention to the product would not have been there. The return of Brock Lesnar would not have been as well viewed or seen or received. I believe the tide has changed in wrestling, and I believe it's specifically related or should be attributed to both WWE and those veteran talents and the current talents stepping up their game and delivering, because everybody who walked down that ramp at WrestleMania 28, everybody who walked down that ramp Monday night at Raw delivered. They delivered. They got themselves noticed. So if the casual fan tuned in to see The Rock at WrestleMania, they saw these other wrestlers perform. That helps everybody. And anybody who's anybody in the wrestling business has said that same thing. From Jim Ross to Kevin Nash to X-Pac to JBL to anybody who's been in the business. It is our responsibility as fans to appreciate the overall contribution to the product. Because as you talk about the APA would not have been as recognized as they were if it was not for the stars on top during the Attitude Era. It all trickles down. John Cena has not been that star who has been engaging enough to draw the large enough audience to WWE to make those other stars get recognized. And by the way, we'll talk more about this on Primetime on Saturday. John Cena deserves a hell of a lot of credit for what he did Sunday and Monday, and his value continues to be understated by the fans in professional wrestling. That's it for that in-depth story and that in-depth discussion. We'd love to hear your comments on it as well. Feel free to go to our website, pwrshow.com, and submit yours. That is all for that. When we come back, we are going to go into, well, we're going to go to a brief timeout. But when we come back, it's going to be a new segment. It's going to be my top 5 of the week. Wait, I just get 1 star of the week and you get a top 5? I do. This will be interesting. I won the draft. This is the Pro Wrestling Report, Primetime Wednesday night. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Anderson, and you are watching Damian Nelson and my super friend David Hero on Milwaukee's My 24. Yeah.
This is Davey Richards, Ring of Honor World Champion, and you're watching Pro Wrestling Report on My 24 Milwaukee.
Welcome back to the Pro Wrestling Report, Primetime Wednesday night. The first of 2 weekly installments of Primetime starting this week as a thank you to all of you fans for making last week our most watched and listened to week ever from the Pro Wrestling Report and celebrating all of our hundreds of brand new subscribers on YouTube. Do you think Sparky had anything to do with that? Wow. I think so. You know what? I don't think they're going to let him back in the building again. You know what, though? I give all the respect in the world to Sparky because he said what he believed. He believed what he said. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. Poor Wicked. But it's what he thought. Oh, it's what he thought. Thank God we had the censors here. There were no beeps. Oh, there could have been beeps. Let's go now to a new segment here on this new edition of Primetime Wednesday. It is the top 5, and each week I'll bring you what I consider to be my top 5 wrestlers or things in the wrestling business. We're going to start with number 5, which is that crowd in Raw in Miami on Monday night. The Miami fans, if you will, that may have indeed been the best live crowd ever, and they made what was a good or excellent Raw into a memorable and significant week of wrestling television. The Miami fans, where there were seemingly no children in the crowd, it was all men it looked like, were adamantly behind everything that was going on. And here's an idea. They were there to be entertained. They were there to enjoy whatever WWE presented to them. And kudos go out to number 5 on this week's top 5, the Miami crowd at the American Airlines Arena on Raw. Number 4 is the WWE production team. You know, I've said many a time on this program that WWE does things that no other entertainment company can do. They did it again, not just at WrestleMania, not just on Raw, but over the last few months, and they worked their asses off tirelessly to bring you the video, the product, and the overall production and presentation that you see every week. A deserved number 4, the WWE production team on this week's Top 5. Number 3, John Cena. Quite frankly, he deserves a lot of credit for laying down, if you will, for The Rock on Sunday night. And then again on Monday night for Brock Lesnar. John Cena, love him, hate him, contributed much more than I think many of us will ever know to the wrestling business with his decisions and his placement and his utilization this past weekend for WWE. Number 3, going out to John Cena. Number 2, he's back, ladies and gentlemen. Here comes the pain, Brock Lesnar. Back to World Wrestling Entertainment. We're going to talk much more about Brock in profile later on in this episode, but Brock is back. He is number 2 because he is the new wave in professional wrestling, and it will become much more clear and obvious over the next few weeks. And number 1, ladies and gentlemen, is the man who was the tsunami that caused that next wave in professional wrestling, The Rock. If not for The Rock, WrestleMania would not have been the atmosphere it was. If not for The Rock, the matchup, the main event at WrestleMania would have been nothing more than another match as opposed to a clear main event. If not for The Rock, WWE would not have achieved the business successes that it did on Sunday at WrestleMania, and it would not have built the intrigue that it did on Monday on Raw. If not for The Rock, WWE would not have had as great a WrestleMania as they did. The Rock is number 1 this week in the top 5. Speaking of The Rock, speaking of Brock Lesnar, let's go into this week's profile, David Hero, now a part of PrimeTime Wednesday night. Brock Lesnar is the subject this week. And while there were rumors and reports that Brock would return to wrestling at WrestleMania or on Raw, it didn't matter because that moment when he returned on Monday night was absolutely mark-out-ish.
Well, you know, they mentioned there was reports and rumors and shenanigans that the Brock-Rock confrontation would happen at WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. And then you had to realize that was one hell of a walk from backstage to the ring. There's no way they could have pulled that off as easily as they did on Monday night. But Brock Lesnar is back after several-year layoff.
Oh, not layoff. He was in UFC.
Oh, no, it's a layoff. He wasn't wrestling. He wasn't, in the ring bumping around. He was,
December 30th. Oh, from wrestling.
Yes, okay. From wrestling. But, boy, Brock Lesnar, who would have, Well,
let's first talk about the career of Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar, who won the NCAA Wrestling Championship in the year 2000 after coming in second place in 1999, then signed with World Wrestling Entertainment in 2002, would go on to win the King of the Ring that year and face The Rock at SummerSlam 2002 to win the WWE Championship in an atmosphere that was electric and one that did not like The Rock very much at that time as he was on his way out of WWE to film movies. At that time, Brock Lesnar was the youngest WWE champion at only 25 years of age. That would be surpassed by Randy Orton later on. And he would then go on to win the Royal Rumble in 2003. Only 2 years, though, is the time in which Brock would be in World Wrestling Entertainment as he would depart the company in 2004 at WrestleMania 20. 2 years, a man made so much impact in World Wrestling Entertainment. The next big thing, Brock Lesnar, he was with Paul Heyman. Here comes the pain. The athleticism, the matchups, the presence of Brock Lesnar was phenomenal. Had I been endorsing people at the time, Brock Lesnar would be endorsed. Are there many more people who made such an impact in such a brief amount of time in professional wrestling as Brock Lesnar did?
Well, in 2 years, he got it on with Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker.
Big Show, broke the ring.
Big Show, Bill Goldberg, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and The Rock. What was left? At that time, there was nothing left for the guy to do.
And remember, he was fairly goofy at the end in a series of
Kurt
stories
Angle,
with
John Cena,
Eddie Guerrero as well, where he's wearing the sombrero and became a little bit of a joke. But Brock Lesnar is that guy. I mean, he is he is a star. There is no doubt about it, and his star value increased when he made the decision to go to the UFC, which would happen in 2007 after a failed stint with the Minnesota Vikings, where he was never really played aside from the preseason, where he ended up being a late cut for that team. Now, Brock did decide after that to go back into professional wrestling. He would go to Japan and win the IWGP Championship in 2005. This would cause some legal issues with WWE because he had a 10-year no-compete clause, or a 5-year, whatever it was, no-compete clause,
10 years.
where he could not appear, which he signed, by the way, when he renewed his contract through 2010, in 2003. Would then sue WWE to get out of that. An agreement would be made later on. And Brock, going to UFC in October of 2007, lost in his debut fight to Frank Mir, would then take the UFC championship away from Randy Couture in 2008, and retired from the UFC back on December 30th of last year after losing to Alistair Overeem. Now, you've made the point, David Hero, that he lost his last 2 fights in UFC. I'm not sure if that matters, though, to the WWE audience, especially after not only the crowd in Miami, but all the fans all over the world's reaction to his big return Monday night. There is genuine excitement and, I think, surprise and shock over the return of Brock Lesnar to WWE.
Well, because he's the big killer. He's the monster. And hey, who wouldn't want the monster killer to come after John Cena?
Abyss?
Well, him too. But I'm just saying, it's a great scenario for Brock Lesnar. He's going right straight to the top again, which I can't wait to hear the fans complain about that. But it's Brock Lesnar. He's the former UFC World Heavyweight Champion, right?
Yes, indeed. An undisputed champion as well. Brock Lesnar, as big or bigger than The Rock?
No, he's
For
not.
overall,
he's not as big. No way. The Rock is the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. He's a bigger star than Brock Lesnar. Mm-hmm. He's a bigger star than Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I would have to say he is almost as big of a star as Hulk Hogan.
For the casual fan, is he bigger or as big as The Rock? For the casual wrestling fan who doesn't care about all those things you just said.
No, the casual wrestling fan, The Rock is the biggest star, hands down.
On Monday morning, when they tuned to Yahoo Sports, AOL, whatever, all the MMA sites, they were talking about Brock Lesnar and WWE. The Rock arguably never got that mainstream attention in his return to WWE. For that purpose, does the Brock Lesnar mean more initially than The Rock did coming back in?
The reason Brock Lesnar got more hoopla is because he's a former UFC champion.
Right.
That's it. But I'll tell you this right now: when G.I. Joe pops, people have forgotten about Brock Lesnar.
No, not at all.
I'm saying if G.I. Joe was making his return to WrestleMania, that would be the front page of the news.
Well, G.I. Joe was never in WrestleMania.
But you know what I mean? The Rock being in G.I. Joe, right? Listen, Brock Lesnar, talented, huge star, tremendous athletic ability. But at the end of the day, he's not The Rock.
It's a natural next step, and I think this will be as big as The Rock for WWE. Overall, it is strategic. It's much like my picks in the draft. They went from The Rock being a part of WrestleMania to now Brock Lesnar being a part of WWE. I didn't get lucky with anything.
April 21st is a new day.
A new day for
draft.
you to lose again. You were all happy when your George Bush won by a couple hundred, or actually he lost by the popular vote and won by the electoral vote.
That's kind of how I feel right now. I almost feel like Al Gore.
Are you going to fight this?
I have the.
You want to go to the Supreme Court? They're busy right now.
I have the popular vote.
That doesn't matter. This ain't high school.
I'm just saying that technicalities.
Loser! You lost.
Did I get my points for the poster?
Yeah, you did. You got points for everything.
I never saw any of these shenanigans, spreadsheets, and points. I'm gonna have
Eisenberg, Weigel, and Carlson, Blau, Reitz, and Clements took care of all the tabulation.
I am going to have to give David Gruber a call and have him check this over for me.
How many calls do we have to make?
One call. That's all.
That's this week's profile looking at Brock Lesnar. Much more on Brock Lesnar's return to WWE coming up this Saturday on Primetime Saturday night. But now let's go to Ask the Booker, ladies and gentlemen. The way this works is you submit questions to atb@pwrshow.com, and that one answers them. This week's question comes from Norman McGuire from Farmingdale, Maine. His question is in several pieces.
Of
the
course.
first of which is, with WWE's mishandling of the invasion angle in 2001, how would you book it to make sure neither company looked weak? Who from WCW and ECW would you use? How long would the angle go on for? And who, if any, would defect to the other side to keep the angle from going stale? Before we answer that, let's go to what happened. The invasion angle, when WWE purchased WCW, I went out and I bought my competition, is talked about as one of the most failed ventures in professional wrestling. The Invasion pay-per-view in July of 2001, I believe it was, maybe 2003, I forget, was one of the most bought pay-per-views in WWE history. From there, things fizzled. From there, Stone Cold Steve Austin would join the Alliance. From there, it would only be WWE, and WCW would be nothing but video archives.
The only way that an invasion would have truly worked is if they would have had the right pieces to the puzzle. If they would have had DDP and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Bill Goldberg and Booker T and Ric Flair, and not have to have the guys that would cross over.
They had Buff Bagwell.
But he only lasted for a match or two.
Speaking of Scott Steiner, you follow him on Twitter?
I do follow Scott. Boy, is he bitter, isn't he? Are we talking about Scott Steiner or are we talking about
You mentioned Scott Steiner. That reminded me that he's been vocal on Twitter.
Steiner
I'm sorry, I thought you did, but he came in with part of that original brigade.
Yeah. The only way it would have worked, that's how everybody would have stayed strong. But at the end of the day, you know that the WWE was going to have to go over in that feud. As far as the ECW, just use the original guys. You can have Raven, Dreamer, Rhino, Sandman, Sabu. All of them is fine. But WCW was the machine that had the most heat with Raw. And when they didn't have Goldberg coming in, and Kevin Nash, and the stars that made WCW tick, you knew it wasn't going to work. Because at that time, and this is no offense at all to guys like Shane Helms and Lance Storm and Mike Awesome and
just incredible
guys that Austin could have beat them all by himself, right? So with The Rock, there wasn't enough firepower on the opposing team to make it worthwhile.
You think that's why they combined it and made it the Alliance?
They had to, because...
And had Stephanie and Shane involved as well?
And even combined, it was brutal, because I didn't believe that was truly WCW.
Do you remember Survivor Series 2001? It was WWE versus the Alliance to determine which company would prevail. Mm-hmm. The excitement, the energy, the way that pay-per-view was presented. That's one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. And then the following night, Vince McMahon coming out, getting rid of Stephanie, getting rid of Shane. Security! Get this woman out of my ring. It was a great time. For me, at least as a fan, it was a great time. And it was a fun story that took over the entire company. Paul Heyman on commentary, him and Jim Ross arguing every week. It was great stuff, but it went away. It seemed like from day one, as you alluded to a moment ago, from day one, it wasn't going to work.
No, not at all.
It wasn't going to be allowed to work.
There wasn't the star power for it.
WCW was not going to be allowed to work. Meaning WWE was not going to let it work.
Well, no, because they bought it for the library. $2 million.
That's it?
All of that.
We could have bought it.
We could have if you let me borrow the Amex once in a while, but...
By the way, that thing's maxed. Whoops.
You know what? Linda.
She was gone for about a day.
Yes. That was not me.
I thought she was making money, not spending money.
Well, what do you mean she was making money?
Well, selling gimmicks.
Bro, you're going to get her in trouble.
What are you talking about?
The E bought it because, we'll talk about that later. The E bought it for the merchandising rights, the DVDs, everything else. They bought that company to bury it. They knew by not having the main stars that it wouldn't be believable anyhow. At the end of the day, they've made more money off of that investment than the XFL and their entire movie division.
They haven't made a dime on their movie division, so that's not difficult.
Well, there you go.
That's this week's edition, the debut edition of PWR Primetime Wednesday night. We're like Dateline, you know? Remember they used to have Dateline on almost every night? We're not going to do that, but...
we're not going to catch any predators either, are we?
I'm Chris Hansen.
What are you shaking my hand for?
You want some sweet tea, some cookies?
No.
Something? What's in your bag there?
It's my phone. What's in your bag?
My Easter basket.
Yeah. Hey.
Primetime Saturday night. It's our Easter edition of the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime.
This is cute.
I'm not wearing that. I don't even know how they get in there. I just want the peeps. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you Saturday night for a new edition of Primetime. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow night to Sudden Impact Radio.
I think
right after Impact Wrestling.
Linda has peeps because you said she's selling gimmicks.
She has what?
Let me get a hold of her. 1 second.
For that one, this is Damian Nelson saying thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again Saturday night.
Linda!